Duval Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, March 2nd. It's now 5:31. Jody, you've got us recording. Thank you. Tonight we have three key items. One is a presentation on the Watershed Restoration Enhancement Plan from Ingrid Jones. We have a presentation from Jake Johnson on federal representation. He does a lot of work in Washington, D.C. on behalf of cities, specifically smaller cities. And then we have a update from Public Works, Director Leniszewski and Sean Tozer on the Comprehensive Water System Plan update. So with that, we'll get started. We'll go with good of the order. Any items that council wants to share before we get started on our regular items?
Let's see, I do have one item.
Go ahead, Rick.
And I think some of the other council members possibly received this some notification. And Mayor Archelander, I think you did as well. And there's a blood drive in Woodinville by, I believe it's put on by Blood Works. And it will take place, I believe, next month. But they sent me an email requesting support and the possibility of spreading the word out so they get more response. My my question, I guess, is twofold. I talked to Councilmember Remington a bit about this and asked Jody about it as well. But is this type of thing that would be appropriate possibly for your mayor newsletter, Mayor?
It possibly, it depends on the circumstances, but is this the one in memory of Sophie Theriault?
Yes, that's
okay. So it's too late for the mayor's letter for that, but as soon as we got the notice, Sean publicized it on our social media. And I know I've personally been passing it around, as others have been as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So you say we already have put that out on our social media? Is that
yes?
Correct?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. I wasn't aware of that. So
yep.
Great. You know, it's a good cause. I certainly want to do what we can to support it. So this sounds like you're one step ahead of me, which isn't surprising.
Yeah, and just for the council's sake that don't know her, she was a young adult who was very active in the Snoqualmie Valley Community Network, a rising artist, just full of life. And she died in a tragic car accident right before Christmas. Her mom's a member of our community, actually used to be a former coworker of mine. And so, Sophie made a huge impact in our community in the time that she was here. So it's definitely a big loss. And if anybody can sign up to donate, I highly encourage you to do so.
Yeah, great. No, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other council members? Good of the order? Not seeing any hands. We'll move on to our first item. This one is a real pleasure for me to introduce Ingrid Jones. She's with the Department of Ecology Water Resources Division. In particular, she is the Streamflow Restoration Implementation lead, which means she gets to head up 30 plus agencies and try to keep us all in line. Ingrid, I asked her this evening to come and do a presentation. She also met with us last September and gave us an overview. We began meeting, this was a new law passed in 2018, requiring each of the 15 RIAs, Watershed Resource Inventory Areas, they're called, throughout the state of Washington to come up with a watershed plan, or if you already had a plan, you'd just be adding an amendment. What it boils down to is, what's this all about? It's really trying to maintain stream flows. The new well systems that draw water out of the ground affect stream flow. So in particular, we were looking at new permit exempt wells. And the reason this is important to Duval is that we will be asked to vote on this. We aren't adopting the plan, but we're approving the plan that has been provided over or built over the last 2 years, going to the Department of Ecology for their review. Because I'm a plan or a committee member, our council would be approving me on your behalf to go and vote yes or no. The way this works is 100% of the committee members need to approve it to be able to pass it on to ecology. If anyone doesn't approve it, the plan, then it's up to the Department of Ecology to develop their own plan for the watershed. So with that, I just wanted to mention a little bit about INGRIA. I've worked with a lot of committees, very few that were as efficient as INGRIA is. She both comes with an unbelievable amount of experience and knowledge on the environment, and it's her leadership ability that helped put this plan together. So with that, INGRIA, thank you for being here tonight, and we'll be going over, I think we have about 14 or 15 slides just to give you an overview of the planning process and the plan itself. So INGRIA, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you so much for the introduction and for having me here today. Some of this will be review from September, but who remembers several months ago anyway? So hopefully this reminder is helpful to provide context. So in the presentation, I'm gonna just give a high-level overview of the RIA 7, which is the Snohomish Watershed Restoration Enhancement Plan. And the presentation I'm going to give today doesn't include a lot of background on the Streamflow Restoration Law, but I'm happy to take questions or expand upon the information that's provided in the slides. So as Mike mentioned, in January 2018, the Streamflow Restoration Law was passed, and that law establishes new water use limits for permanent exempt wells in certain watersheds in the state, including the Snohomish, and requires 15 watersheds to complete a planning process. And so ecology invited entities identified in the legislation to convene the committee in October 2018. And over the past 2.5 years, the RIA 7 committee has worked to develop a watershed restoration enhancement plan that meets all the requirements of the Streamflow Restoration Law, which are summarized in this slide. And so through the planning process, the committee identified a suite of projects that provide water offset and ecological benefits to the watershed. So in the next slide, I'm going to give just an overview of how ecology is supporting implementation of the watershed plans, and then I'll walk through the key elements of the plan and also some recommendations included in the plan. And then we'll talk about the pathways to plan finalization. So the legislature has authorized $300 million over the course of 15 years to restore and enhance stream flows, help meet the requirements of the Streamflow Restoration Law. And so we're implementing a statewide grant program to help incentivize state and local agencies, tribal governments, and nonprofit organizations to implement local watershed plans and projects in them. And so the funding program is statewide, but it gives priority points to projects that are located in a planning basin like ours. And if the RIA 7 Watershed Restoration Enhancement Plan is locally approved by all the committee members, like Mike mentioned, and then adopted by ecology, then the projects in it will also receive additional priority points for funding. So the funding source is statewide, it's competitive, the needs are greater than the funds to implement all 15 of the plans. But we have projects in the plans, but we have entities that are all committed to implementation in this watershed. So one required element of the plan is a subbasin delineation. And so The committee started by dividing the watershed into 16 subbasins for the purpose of assessing consumptive water use and project benefits. And it was really helpful in, figuring out the timing of where new water use would occur, and also the timing of benefits from the projects that the committee has identified. So the committee then developed a method that they agreed was appropriate to project the number of new permit exempt wells over the next 20 years in the watershed. And so that was the first step of estimating consumptive use. And so this growth projection, the committee projected 3,389 new permit exempt wells over the next 20 years. And so how this affects the city of Duval, through Mike's participation on the committee, we've learned that, the city of Duval does not expect new permit exempt wells to occur actually within the city. And all new development in the city is required to use and install, facilities to connect to the public water system. And so this impact to the city is probably zero to negligible in terms of where those wells will actually be. And so the committee took that projection of new permit exempt wells to then estimate the consumptive water use that the plan needs to address. And so that's the portion of the water that's withdrawn from the well that doesn't return to the stream flow or the groundwater. And so the committee estimated 797.4 acre feet per year of new consumptive water use. And that is about 1.1 cubic feet per second. So if you picture like a basketball or a large records box just floating down a river, one every second. So that's the total use from all these new wells. And it varies by area in the watershed, just based on, where the most rainfall is and land use patterns. So the next step was to identify projects, and the committee identified 11 water offset projects and 27 habitat projects to offset the consumptive use and achieve a net ecological benefit across the watershed. So this slide shows the examples of the types of projects that are included in the plan. And the water projects are expected to provide increased stream flow, improved water quality, increased groundwater recharge, among other benefits. And the habitat projects are expected to provide lots of good things like increased aquatic habitat diversity, restored native vegetation, improved sediment processes, improved water temperature benefits, a lot of the same goals that the salmon recovery process is working towards. So this slide shows the location of the 11 water offset projects that the committee identified. And we estimated that the benefit from those is going to be 1,373.4 acre feet. So that is a lot more than the amount we needed to offset. Committee worked really hard to identify these projects and estimate the water offset they'll provide to the watershed when they're implemented. And the plan has a stream flow augmentation project, 2 projects that improve lake level management to increase summer stream flow, 6 water right acquisitions, 1 or more managed aquifer recharge projects, and also 1 or more surface water storage projects. And so the plan also identifies 27 habitat projects to provide ecological improvements across the watershed. And when we were identifying these, the committee really considered salmon recovery priorities, whether the sponsor was ready to proceed with the project in the near term. And some of these potentially familiar projects include the Fall City Floodplain Reconnection Project, also called Hacker Barthew's, City of North Bend, South Fork Snoqualmie River Levee Setback Project, and then also the Snoqualmie Valley WID's efforts to restore Cherry Creek and build a more climate resilient watershed there in your neighborhood. So in addition to the water asset and habitat projects in the plan, the committee identified types of projects that it supports that, you know, they weren't able to identify during the really short planning timeline, but recommends them for future implementation if opportunities come up after the plan has been adopted. And the committee also included what they termed policy and regulatory recommendations. And these are, they're just recommendations. So the plan doesn't create an obligation on anyone to make sure that these are implemented. But they're really included in the plan to show support for programs, policies, regulatory actions that the committee thinks will contribute to streamflow restoration. And adaptive management was also an optional element of the plan, but it was really important to committee members. And the committee agreed to include several adaptive management recommendations in the plan that are on this slide. And the committee thinks that these will really help address uncertainty in the plan and increase assurances that the plan is really going to meet its objectives to have an ecological benefit in the watershed. So the committee really looked at the plan as a whole that we drafted, looked at our project portfolio as a whole to evaluate whether the committee thinks the plan achieves a net ecological benefit. And so this slide has just a quote pulled from the plan that says, based on the information and analyses summarized in this plan and the assumption that the plan will be implemented, the committee finds that this plan can achieve a net ecological benefit in RISE 7 as required by the law. And so that really helps ecology give deference to the committee when we evaluate the plan. So the committee's role was really to develop this plan and also to locally approve the plan. And so ecology will review locally approved plans and then determine whether they meet the requirements of the law to offset the consumptive use from the new domestic permit exempt wells and to then also achieve that net ecological benefit. And so after a lot of great work from the committee, they gave interim approval of the final draft plan in January, and that started a local review process. And so we've asked entities to complete their local review by April 9th and to determine whether they want to vote in support of the plan. And then the committee's going to meet in April. And as Mike also mentioned, all of the voting members on the committee have to approve the plan in order for ecology to then receive it. And so if in the case that that's not, that we don't get full agreement, there's still a pathway for the plan to be finalized. And ecology would then prepare and finalize the plan and then initiate rulemaking. So we're here at this local review process, asking whether your entity is prepared to approve the plan. And I am happy to take any questions.
Ingria, thank you. So I'll just open it up to any council members that have questions. Again, we're trying to streamline this process. And as Ingrid has said, it doesn't have a ton of impact since we don't have permit exempt wells in the city or expect to grow by using wells. So what this really does impact for the city of Duval is our environment. Will help to restore and enhance our stream flows into the future, helping salmon recovery. And as Ingrid pointed out, one of those specific projects is here at Cherry Creek, which is just immediately north of the city. So are there any questions or feedback for us from council members or staff? Councilmember Langell and then Councilmember Schaefer. I think you're still on mute, Councilmember Langell.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I really enjoyed reading the PowerPoint before the meeting. And this is sort of a little related question is, I had a discussion with a neighbor recently about water use. And even though we're not on wells here, I was trying to explain to him why water conservation and why I don't water my lawn, for example. And it occurred to me as you were presenting, is there simple information that we can share when those kinds of discussions go on or refer to, so that people understand the larger importance of water conservation, even if we're not on wells? Because he didn't really seem to understand why water conservation is important, not just for water treatment plants and stuff like that. He didn't seem to get it. So is there a source we can refer people to or discuss from more intelligently?
Yeah, you know, my first thought is the King Conservation District. I will take a look and see if they have a good ready to go resources. We might also have some at Ecology. So that's a great question. And I'll follow up and see if I can provide something to Mike.
That'd be great.
Share with
Thank
all.
you.
Mhm.
Well, Dot, thanks for the question. I think we all recognize that our wintertime stream flows are pretty good, and especially right outside Duval. Sometimes they go from sea to shining sea, but it's in the summertime, and most of the water that gets used are outdoor use in the summer. So it really is a good question and a key to maintaining a healthy environment here. Councilmember Schaefer.
Thank you. I guess one question and a comment. Question: the permit exempt wells, they don't even. This is a question for you, Ingrid. They don't even require a notification to some county or state authority. Can anyone just put a well in, assuming it's a permit exempt area?
Yeah, so the process for the wells is that there's a notice of intent that's required before a well gets drilled. And that notice of intent is submitted to Ecology, and it has to state, what the proposed water use is. And if that is, not, if it's under the water use limit and it's for just domestic purposes, then there's no water right permitting process. But, a lot of times through the land use permitting process, whether it's in the city or the county, there will be other city or county regulations around that. So, for example, King County Permitting Department will ask, whether you ask the property owner to see whether they can first connect to public water to see, that's the best case scenario. Let's see if that's possible. And they have to provide a letter from the nearest water service area saying whether, if it's not possible, they have to prove it's not possible before they go ahead and drill that well. So there are some local processes, but when it's under the water use limit, doesn't have to go through that pretty arduous process of water right permitting that the Water Resources Program at Ecology does.
Okay, good. Yeah, that helps my understanding. So thank you. And then on the comment aspect of this, even though this isn't maybe an impact on the internal water system of Duval. Certainly Duval is closely tied in with our surrounding area. You know, the Snoqualmie Valley here largely defines what Duval and the other communities are in it. And we are very, very much supportive, I think, of a project like this that will actually have a positive effect on things. The other comment, as a fisherman, I've become more and more aware of how complex the situation here is in the Puget Sound area. As far as you know, salmon restoration, you know, the situation our wildlife is in, including orcas. And although a lot of people simplistically want to blame it on one or two things, the reality is it's many, many, many factors that contribute to that. Things as simple as the amount of shade along the stream changing over time will have impact on downstream on salmon, simply because of the type of food that is available to them, etc. So anyway, appreciate your efforts very much, and certainly very, very supportive of what you do. So thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember McHenry.
If I don't know, Director Laniszewski had his hand up before me, if he wanted to go ahead.
Director Laniszewski.
Hello, everyone. Steve Laniszewski, Public Works. So just a couple notes. So Councilmember Lengel on the city's website. And Jody, can I use the chat, or do we not record the chat?
We're not supposed to, but if you're doing just a link to like an outside source for the public, you can do that.
So the city's website under water has a bunch of conservation elements in it. You can share that, Dorothy. And then on the wells, so we have a larger, which is a great segue into the next discussion topic. We have a larger water service area than our city limits, right? And when there is a residential building permit in King County, they send them to us for water, right? So if there's water nearby or close enough, that we facilitate that water certificate of availability for them. However, if it is fairly far off, and which is why we've talked about making sure our limits of our service boundary are really relative. We don't want this giant boundary that we never want to serve. That's not going to help anybody. So we have neighbors with 119 and or Woodinville water. So we do try to make sure that they are reasonable. But yes, sometimes in those rural areas where we don't have pipe within, 3,000 feet, they can drill a domestic well for residential service. But we do participate in how those wells are implemented in the local area outside the city limits. Just want to share.
Well, thank you, Steve. Councilmember McHenry.
Ingrid, thank you so much for this presentation. I really enjoyed it. I guess I have a higher level question, and I don't know how easy it is to answer, but do you have a sense of if the needle is moving from, restoration to more maintenance and prevention? I noticed a lot of the grant projects, of course, are restoration, fixing things that have become broken. So I guess I was wondering at this point in time how we feel about, are there agencies that are also working, using all the research and everything we know now to prevent other areas that we've identified as critical for our ecosystems to get to that point where they need to be restored as well?
So I think if I understand your question correctly, part of this plan, it is to offset, potential impacts from when these new wells come in to the watershed. So in that sense, it's kind of forward-looking to offset those new impacts. And I think what's really great about all the projects in the plan is that they're going way above and beyond that. And so that additional water that's provided beyond just how much the wells are going to use is really going to help to move the needle for stream flows, which are really really low in the summertime. And that has an impact on salmon recovery. And so, we have a couple of habitat projects in the plan that are land acquisitions. And so those would be purchasing land with the goal of restoring it back to a more natural state. So I think that, when those projects get implemented, they will help move the needle. And, once that land is in, for example, King County is a sponsor for one of those projects. Then once the land is acquired and it's restored, it won't go back into developed state. So
slow but sure progress for sure.
Yeah. And I think this plan is helping to support salmon recovery goals, but as we all know, salmon recovery is lagging, and it's a long process. But I think this plan definitely helps to move the needle.
Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Other questions or feedback? Director Thomas.
Good evening. Laura Thomas for the record, Community Development. I was just going to kind of pair on to what Councilmember McHenry said. We do have a Snohomish Basin salmon recovery plan that's, gosh, I think it's like close to its 20th year, not quite, but close. I was able to work on that early on in my career, and they look at metrics about every decade. So I'll pull that document up and I can send it to council, because we are starting to see restoration gains and acquisitions. We're starting to see some areas that are starting to recover. But the one thing that I was told is that it'll take potentially 50 years or more for us to start to see that change, which it can be really hard for decision makers, because the decisions that we make today, we'll get to see the results of in another generation. So I'll send that plan out. It was the metrics were just completed, I want to say a couple of years ago, and Councilmember Remington wasn't on the watershed forum, I don't believe, at that time, so he hasn't seen that. So I'll send that out. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Councilmember Naplin.
Yeah, I was just looking at it and I want to make sure I have our area correct. Is it North Snoqualmie and Cherry Harris? Do those both fall into the city? Maybe.
That is, so the Cherry Harris that you see, so on that map, we didn't have Duval on there, but if you look at that map, what you'll see is towards the center of the watershed and to the west side or the left as you're looking at the map, that's the Cherry Harris is north of us. So that is roughly where Duval is.
Okay. And is the only project that impacts those two, are they called sub areas? I can't remember what they're called. The North Snoqualmie and the Cherry Harris is the only project that is in those areas. Is it the restoration of Cherry Creek, or is there another project?
That's a great question. I don't have that pulled up right now, but there are in Snoqualmie North, we identified that as a potential area for managed aquifer recharge, and also a potential area for Snoqualmie Valley Wood storage. But I don't recall all the habitat projects off the top of my head, but I can highlight where that is in the plan.
That'd be great. I just was curious. I was trying to look at the map and sort it out what was what and who. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I think everybody that represented different agencies, one of the big questions is kind of like Christmas morning, which presents are mine? So, but Cherry Creek is one of the most endangered salmon habitat areas in the state, and it has been identified. There's actually 2 other groups that are working on restoration projects right now with those landowners where Cherry Creek goes through. So while this aims to hit some of the most important, the projects you want the biggest bang for your bucks since the dollars are limited. And so many of those are further north of us in more endangered areas where the creeks actually dry up. But here we do have a couple that are nearby. The good news is all of these projects, whether they're next door or not, improve things in our environment. Other questions? Well, Ingrid, I don't see any other hands open. I just are up. I want to thank you again for coming. I do, before Ingrid leaves, the way we wanted to do this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Thomas, we wanted to do a resolution. We don't do it at the cow here, but we would bring a resolution and put it on the consent agenda for our next meeting. That would have it approved in time for me to go and vote on behalf of council members. So just seeing a council member's hands up, how many would approve us, one, approving the plan, and two, putting it on the consent agenda? And again, what we're approving is moving it forward from the committee that helped develop it to the Department of Ecology. They'll review it, make any changes necessary, and then recommend final approval. If that's approved at their level, then it would be in place. So again, I'm just looking for a show of hands. How many want to approve the plan and authorize me through a resolution to go and vote yay on it? Well, that looks like we've got all the hands up. So Ingrid, you're welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting if you like, but I'll plan on once that resolution is approved on the consent agenda at our next meeting, going and voting on your behalf. Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you. And thanks to all the other council members who and city staff who added great context to the questions.
Great. Have a good night, Ingrid.
You as well. Bye.
I would be remiss if I didn't recognize, while I'm the committee member, Councilmember Naplin has been the alternate. And while I hadn't missed any of the meetings in the last 2+ years, Jennifer has received hundreds and hundreds of emails with very data-filled information that she's had to look at as well. There is an awful lot of experts that have been next to us on developing this plan, and very thankful for that. And thank you to Jennifer for being the alternate and working with us. We'll move on to our next item, which is the federal representation. Jake Johnson, who's with the Johnston Group. Jake, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you. And Mayor, if you wanted to make any comments as we introduce Jake here.
Sure. Jake reached out to me at the recommendation of council members in other cities to talk about potential federal representation and what that would look like for the city of Duval. This year, what we didn't expect in November is for the president's party to have control of the Senate and the House, which means there's a lot of opportunity over the next 2 years in particular. Nor did we expect to see so many of our congressional representatives in Washington state in senior leadership positions. Right now, besides Congresswoman Del Bene, all of our representatives in the state are primed and in key leadership positions to help get things done. So our state is really in a unique place right now with opportunities to make some progress at the federal level that haven't been there for quite some time. And just as a side note, the city of Carnation, if anybody after this has any questions, I encourage you to contact Mayor Lisk because they've been working with the Johnston Group for a while now regarding their federal issues as well. So with that, Jake, please take it away.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you a little bit about a federal relations program. I'm going to tell you about 60 seconds about me and the Johnston Group, and then I'm going to dive into some of the opportunities that are available at the federal level. And I would strongly encourage you to ask questions at any time during this presentation. This is not a formal PowerPoint, and it works better, I think, in the flow of the conversation if you can ask your questions as they occur. With that, my name is Jake Johnston. I spent the first about decade of my professional career working back in Congress in Washington, D.C., and then moved back to the Northwest, which is where I'm from, in 2000, and have been doing some form of government relations work ever since that time. I worked for a couple of companies, a couple of large agencies, and then in 2009 founded the Johnston Group with a particular emphasis and frankly our exclusive representation of public entities in Washington state. So really all we do is cities and public hospitals, watersheds, an occasional public utility district, but we represent medium and smaller sized public entities in Washington state. We feel like their needs are the same as other larger communities, but the resources and the ability to kind of coalesce around those agendas tends to be a little bit more smaller. So that is the entire focus of our work right now. I've been working with the city of Carnation for just a couple of months at this point, but we've already identified about 5 or 6 different projects that the city is pursuing federal funding to support. And that's an exciting process. And I do encourage you to contact Bob Jean over there or Mayor Lisk. With that, happy to turn the tables to some of the new opportunities that are ahead of us this year. From my standpoint, there's a couple of things, and I'm sure the city's been following the COVID deliberations very closely and the COVID relief bill that has passed the House and is currently before the Senate. I think most of you know that there is funding in that bill earmarked for cities, and specifically about $1.5 to $1.7 million for the city of Duval. And that is funds that will be allocated on basically the CDBG allocation formula, but it will not be a CDBG or a HUD program. It'll be a treasury program. So the allocation formula determines the amount, but it will be a US Treasury program that determines kind of when those funds and how those funds flow out to the city. A couple of notes on those funds. If you don't already know, please somebody wave me off if I'm telling you things you already know. But these funds are really designed to do a couple of things for local communities. Number one, they are there to offset any revenue that is lost from your budgeted revenue. I know that may not be as big a concern in the city of Duval as it is for other communities, but that is an explicit use for these funds. The second is that there's a lot of flexibility for those funds to be used to respond to community needs. So the legislation specifically authorizes the city to partner with nonprofits to basically be a pass-through for some of these funds to other agencies, and to use it to basically best customize the needs that your community has to both protect itself during the COVID pandemic and to emerge from it on the other side. Looking ahead, Congress is also making some other changes this year. We are bringing back what Congress is calling community project funding. You may know them more colloquially as earmarks. These are coming back this year, and the guidelines were just released actually yesterday in terms of what this will look like. And this is going to be certain discretionary spending programs at the federal level. Congress is going to hold back about 1% of the funding from some of those programs and make community projects eligible for direct funding through that process. Members of Congress will be limited to a total of 10 project requests, and it'll be a fully transparent process. Also, only public entities will be eligible for these funds. And that is a process that is kicking off literally right now. And that is a process that we're excited to see come back. This is a tool that has not been available to Congress to partner with public entities for many, many years. And we've seen the results of that play out at a local level. Later on this summer, we will be doing an infrastructure bill as well. I know that one of the jokes in DC is that every week is infrastructure week, and that's a way to, frankly, change the narrative on other things you don't want to talk about. But we did, in fact, pass a transportation bill in the House last year. The Senate was unable to take it up. So that House bill will be the baseline for what we do in the Senate this year, with different kind of partisan control in that chamber. And we're working right now with Congressman Larson, who sits on that committee, to basically make modifications to certain programs so that they're better fits for Northwest communities. And I'm happy to talk more about that at your convenience. But basically, one of the problems we have right now is that all cities, with a few exceptions, compete for the same programs in the same pool of funds. And so the city of Duval is competing not only against the other larger communities in your own county and in your own state, but you're competing with Los Angeles and Chicago and other places around the country for a really limited pool of funds. So one of the reforms that we've been really lobbying for is to look at population tiers and designating total amount of program spends for cities that fall within these population band tiers. And that's a conversation that I'm working very hard on right now in DC. Other things coming up later on this summer, Senator Murray right now is requesting feedback from communities about their infrastructure priorities and projects. And the intent of this is really twofold. It's on one hand to both be able to make the case federally for an infrastructure bill. So this is the universe of projects that are out there that need to be funded. Ergo, we need to develop a bill that can take some of these on. But number two, it's also a way to cast a net for specific projects to support. And it is a kind of screening of what I think will be a community project funding evaluation tool. And I've been working with my other municipal clients right now to identify projects and get feedback on them and build the community support and kind of figure out what's a saleable project and what's not in different communities. I'll stop right there for any questions, and maybe I could turn the corner after any questions that come up now to talking about what kind of a federal relations program looks like for some of the other communities that I work with.
Councilmember Langle.
You mentioned the component about flexibility and partnering with nonprofits. Since this is being administered by Treasury, do you expect that might be through CDFIs?
No, actually, it's one caveat before I answer this question. The caveat is that the Senate hasn't passed the bill yet, so we haven't seen the statute. But so far, the guidance that we've seen is the city will have to attest to the U.S. Department of Treasury that they will use the funds for COVID-related purposes. And then basically, it's a mechanical transaction. The Treasury releases the fund to the state. The state is obligated to push those funds through within 30 days. And the state actually starts paying penalties if they don't meet that time frame. There was a concern federally that the last round of CARES money that came through, some states were great about pushing that out to communities, and some states, frankly, held on to a lot of it. So this bill is really designed to put the money in your community. I can't give you a precise deadline, but I would say within 30 to 45 days of that bill being enacted into law. You should see those funds, again, 45 days after it's signed.
Well, just to follow up, then what does it mean partnering with nonprofits? I mean, cities do invest in CDFIs, and they can leverage lots of other types of money. So that with the COVID, that would be good, especially if they are doing business lending.
Yeah, well,
because they have the existing infrastructure. So I don't know. It just seems like, given Treasury's love for CDFIs, I could see them being a type of partner. And we do have CDFIs that Duval could partner with, it seems, if we wanted to get more leverage with our money.
And again, it's local control. So if that's the decision that the community wants to make, I think that's an eligible use within the scope of the bill. The city of Shoreline that I represent has been, one of their intentions is to use some of these funds to partner with some food service agencies that are helping with hungry kids, frankly, in their school district and subsidizing the meal programs there. So that would be an eligible use of some of the funding as well. And I think basically you've got very few strings attached to this money.
Right.
And the hope is that we don't know precisely how long this pandemic will continue for. We're all hoping it will end soon, but the idea is that there's going to be enough money in here to take care of community needs at a housing, at a human services, at a hunger, and at a level.
And I have one more question, which has to do with Senator Murray requesting infrastructure priorities. And I guess this also ties into earmarks. I'm familiar with those types of investments. And what I've seen in the past is that, again, a community partnership around some of these things can really make the difference for Senator Murray in particular. And do you have any sense in communicating with those folks if that's important in her thinking at this point?
Yeah, listen, all projects that you want to put forward for kind of, basically you build together a funding pool when you're trying to take on this. And the more, frankly, support you can demonstrate behind this idea, the better its competitive nature is. Period. And frankly, there's going to be some projects that just don't build a constituency, but they're critical infrastructure projects that you need to do. And there's going to be others, maybe more community center focused or maybe more community derivative focused that you're going to be able to engender a very large group of people that are willing to stand up and support that request. So it really depends, I think, on the account, number one, the amount of the project, and you know, I'm not trying to hedge my answer to your question here at all. When it's appropriate to do so, having a large group of people behind your request makes a big difference.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Councilmember Naplin.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand this idea about earmarks and being limited to 10. Is it likely that a city like ours could ask for something specific for only our city that would be
Oh yeah,
Absolutely. It's like the legislature in that way.
so you're anticipating that our city should come up with some request, a single request. I'm just curious what kind of parameters you would put on the type of thing that would be most likely to receive funding.
Yeah, let me take a swing at that.
Okay, thanks.
I think what we've found is that infrastructure is ridiculously expensive to build, and it's almost beyond the purview of any one kind of governmental entity to do it. So really successful infrastructure projects tend to have these kind of multi-year, multi-level funding partnerships that get knit together to support them. So sometimes it's a state capital budget request, sometimes it's programmatic grant funding, sometimes it's local revenue, sometimes it's utility fees, and sometimes you're still missing, you know, a piece of that project. And that's really when federal earmarks are the best. Federal earmarks are great when you can finish a project by bringing in some dollars to get it done. Federal earmarks have never been intended to be kind of ongoing revenue for a city. They've intended to be, how do you close a project and bring it to completion so we can put it out there and get it finished? I just don't think you're going to see, you know, some of the egregious natures of the past. I don't think you're going to see tens of millions of dollars of an earmark that's out there. I don't think that's possible. I think you're going to see, is there a $2 million federal earmark that can finish a water infrastructure project to allow for a community to modernize its system and to enhance kind of development, you know, in a housing area or something like that? Is there an economic development strategy that needs federal funding to put into? Is there a housing project? Are we making transit investments? Are we linking the ability for people to remove a reliability on cars in order to facilitate where they need to go for their jobs? These are the types of projects that are going to be highly competitive for earmarks.
Mike Remington, many projects in the past needed to be shovel ready. So you had to have the engineering and design, everything ready to go. Unfortunately, in a smaller city like Duval, shovel-ready projects usually mean we've already planned out the funding for it just to be smart. Is there a chance for a city like Duval, and I'll use our 3rd Avenue as an example, we need to look at modernizing and building that cross-city corridor. And we haven't, you know, well, it's on our project list, we haven't got a lot going with it right yet. Does a project like that have a chance for a small city like us for an earmark in this type of setting?
The answer is absolutely. And let me try to answer this a little bit more broadly too. If you remember back to the last stimulus bill we did, the American Recovery Act, which was, boy, almost 15 years ago now. The American Recovery Act, projects had to be shovel ready in order to get funded in that. Well, one of the shovel-ready projects that we funded in the American Recovery Act was the Point Defiance rail bypass route, the Amtrak route, and that's still not open for business. So, you know, shovel-ready, I think, depends different things in different programs. Shovel-ready for a community center project, you know, if we're building a building to serve a community need, yeah, number one, the design features on that are relatively short-term, right, and short in terms of the ability to get them done. And yeah, that needs to be probably ready to go within a year or two. A street project that has fundamental, you know, design and planning, potentially right-of-way acquisition, things like that, where smaller communities aren't going to start this process without a clear funding path to the end. And Congress recognizes that. So I think for projects that are frankly under a certain financial threshold, the window to build them is longer.
And Jake, another question. Thank you for that, by the way. So could you give us an example where, if you can, you do work with other cities. Can you give an example of a city that you represent that needed funding for a certain project or to push a certain thing, that program they needed, that were successful? I know that there were a lot of light rail push and pull from cities along the corridor running up from Seattle, and cities needing funding, and everybody was fighting for it. I thought you might have been involved with that. Can you share any of that and give us some insight into, where your leverage has been important for funding?
Sure. So I've represented the city of Mountlake Terrace, which is in South Snohomish County, right along the I-5 corridor. They do have a light rail station coming to their community in 2024, planned, 2026 expected. And I've been working with them. They were actually my first client. So I've been working with them for a long time, since 2009. And we have been working on a series of activities throughout this time. And I'm going to answer your question directly about the projects that we've received funding for. But the scope of work I do with the city is not just chasing money to finish a project, but it's also looking at projects on the long-term capital improvement plan and figuring out which of these are potentially eligible within discretionary grant programs. So it's looking at it in two ways. It's looking at where are the projects that we need to go find funding for in the short term to bring them to completion. And then long term, how do we orient projects in a way that makes them eligible for funding in different avenues and different ideas. So some of the projects that we've gotten done for them, they've been trying to redevelop their really about 8.5 block Main Street arterial to connect to their light rail station. And this has involved, new street reconstruction, new sidewalks, underground utilities, kind of the whole 9 yards. These were old single-family home zoned neighborhoods. So the entire utility infrastructure had to be rebuilt. So the first thing we did was we got federal earmarks to help replace the water main that went along Main Street here. And previously it had been a 4-inch pipe. And you can't permit buildings to go up in height unless you have a 12-inch pipe that can handle fire flows to go up that high. So we were able to make this economic development argument about the need to replace this water main. So we brought federal funds in to support that over 2 different fiscal cycles. Then we built, using federal dollars, we also did a stormwater detention facility. And we did a giant one for the entire, we did an underground detention facility for the entire downtown redevelopment. And by doing this, it was an incentive to the developers to tie into the existing network, and you took away an obligation that you would ordinarily impose upon developers when they put these buildings in. So those were 2 kind of examples of how we helped facilitate some of the activity around the light rail station for housing and for jobs and for entertainment and restaurants and things like that. We also got federal funding for a pedestrian trail to link the transit center to what's called the interurban trail, which is the north-south non-motorized trail going from Seattle all the way to Everett. And we've also received money to do watershed restoration projects similar to the presentation we just heard this morning, or previous to mine, in Lake Ballinger, which is in Mountlake Terrace. So we're doing salmon habitat restoration, and we're rechanneling Hall Creek in that area using money with the Army Corps of Engineers. And then we've also done some street funding projects as well. Oh, and some emergency services dollars for police equipment.
So Jake, just to follow up on that, and then Councilmember Schaefer has a question. So these are projects we're talking about, but you also work on legislation that helps benefit smaller cities, I understand. Bigger cities often have, their own representatives that are pushing for things that benefit larger cities, where smaller cities kind of get left out. But you've actually helped work on pushing legislation that's beneficial to smaller cities so that we have a better chance to get a piece of that pie. Is that correct?
It is correct. It's, I think, yeah, policy lobbying is a key portion of any federal relations effort, right? It's not just where's the city of Duval's kind of voice in this process, and where do regulations and programs fit the city, and where do they need to be augmented or changed to be a better fit. But it's also looking at discretionary grant programs. So for example, there's one main infrastructure grant program available to cities today. It's called the BUILD program. used to be known as the Tiger program. It's the same thing. Over the entire life cycle of the build program funding, every single project granted in Washington state has gone to a city of over 100,000 people. And most of them are going to, Spokane and Seattle. I mean, just so we're really clear about this. And that's great. These are needy projects for this program, but how is a smaller community supposed to compete against Seattle in the same pool for the same projects using the same evaluation criteria? And that's where we need to look at, how do we look at these discretionary grant programs and say, all right, how are we making sure that we're meeting real community needs? And so Mr. Larson's been really interested in this program for a long time. We've been working for a couple of years, so far unsuccessfully, but we've been looking at how do we push the transportation bill to really look at new tools for small cities. And how do we create new grant program partnership opportunities so that your city can apply on a competitive basis, but be evaluated against your peers. So we can make decisions about where the most meritorious projects need to go.
Thank you. Councilmember Schaefer.
Thank you. Yeah, mine's really just a continuation of Councilmember Remington's question. And I'm just looking for, I guess, maybe a little bit more, more details. For example, you would help a city, this is a question, by the way, you would help a city write up a proposal for a grant before that was submitted. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I'm not an engineer, so you wouldn't want me writing the engineering portion to that grant, but definitely I'm a liberal arts major, and that means that I can help with the narrative portion. And we can help make sure that the presentation and the pitch that we're making on these projects, right, fits with the legislative and the statutory intent from both Congress and the administration. So when we are pitching this to the relevant agencies, we're looking at it from their lens as well. And it's not just writing a grant application. I want to be clear about this. It's doing pre-meetings with the grant making agency. It's making sure that we've frankly met with them about what our ideas are. So we get pre-feedback on this process. We bring in community support letters, as the other council members said. We make sure that our delegation is aligned with our grant request. So even though this is an apolitical process, you're making sure that you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's and making sure that you are putting in your best case to be blunt. Sure,
exactly. Yeah, and that was exactly what I was searching for. And your specialty with the smaller municipalities, is that strictly here in Washington, or is it other states as well?
No, it's just here. When I worked back in our congressional delegation back in DC, I had the privilege of working with so many communities, and then I just found that the needs were so disproportionately felt or stated, I should say, in those DC offices by a certain set of cities and a certain set of entities. And I got really excited about what were the problems in other communities. And listen, the biggest city I represent is Shoreline. It's 58,000 people. It goes down from there. Lakewood is over 50,000, but just barely. And then it's Lake Forest Park, it's Mount Lake Terrace, it's Bremerton and Carnation. Those are my municipal client base in the state of Washington. I am a small company, and which makes me an affordable option for smaller cities. Yeah. And that's the business model, sir.
Yeah, no, terrific. And on the lobbying side of things, are you also involved with that, or not as much?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm absolutely a federal lobbyist for each of these cities. Yes, mm-hmm. I am a registered federal lobbyist. I handle that on the federal side, and I do that on both policy and a funding level.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Mayor Okerlander.
Thank you. Jake, I know you and I talked a little bit before about besides transportation, one of our city's biggest challenges is reliable broadband. And there's been some major shift, obviously, with the administration and who's running the FCC, as well as Senator Cantwell's efforts to get some needed changes. And I know that we've mentioned it's on our consistently one of our agendas is getting broadband declared a public utility. While we know that that's a long ways out, I know that Congress is looking to make some major changes to how what they're doing with broadband programming. Previously, it was the last mile. Now they're looking at filling in gaps. Have just launched the $50 per household low-income subsidy for internet. And obviously, our issues are lack of choice and then lack of reliability, which frankly every community is dealing with. So what are you seeing as far as the outlook of making some progress towards jurisdictions having some level of control, or Congress putting some guardrails around these companies to ensure that they're providing this needed service?
Thanks, Mayor. Couple of things. Number one, I don't think Congress is going to take this on sequentially. And the first thing that they're going to take on is basically the gaps in the system right now. There is, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but there is a substantial percentage of American households that do not have reliable access to internet generally and high-speed internet specifically. And so Congress wants to create funding and make that available to communities to help solve that problem first. Now, I don't know how that intersects with the franchise agreements or the declaration of the service as a utility. I'm not entirely clear on that at this stage of the thing. But the transportation and infrastructure bill that passed the House last year had a broadband title in it, and we expect that to be the case this year as well.
So if I can follow up on that real quickly, one of the conversations we had at the Association of Washington Cities Board of Directors within the last couple of weeks was the way that the federal government identifies whether there's gaps in service actually miss a significant portion of the areas that are underserved. So I know that that's something that's certainly on the state association's radar of trying to work with the delegations and the agencies to get some more realistic data on where the gaps actually exist. I mean, we do have places within the city of Duval city limits that are not served. We have a local business that wanted to put a new line to their business, and it was going to be $45,000. And this is a service that, they should already have in their building. So, thinking about those kinds of gaps, I know that that's something that we would also be interested in advocating for, to try and really impress upon the members that this is a really big issue. It's not just economic development anymore. It's about survivability and livability for those working from home and kids that have to go to school from home.
Maybe a comment in response, Mayor. A lot of my work has focused on, and I don't know if this is by design or just by happenstance, but a lot of my clients have found themselves, let's just collectively refer to them as odd ducks. So that you have federal policies that get put into place at a federal level that's supposed to, frankly, cover all regulations for all communities equally. But my communities, for whatever reason, aren't able to access the benefits of those programs for a variety of different reasons. And so a lot of what I've done over the 12 years I've been in business doing this has been really looking at making federal programs work for communities when the stated goals of those programs just don't reach them. And so it's not lobbying for some kind of parochial thing that only is for Duval, but it's rather pointing out problems in the administration of programs and then dealing with regulatory changes and legislative changes to make sure that the benefits from those programs flow equally to communities. We're good at that. And frankly, this problem solution dynamic of lobbying is really what we do. We don't arm twist. We don't, it's a different type of lobbying.
Well, Jake, I want to say I really appreciate you being here. This is new for Duval. We were just really trying to have you educate us on what the opportunities are. I love seeing you work with smaller cities. We certainly band together here in the Valley with the Snoqualmie Valley Government Association to work together to advance key needs in our own valley. I see this similar where smaller cities really help promote our needs back in Washington, D.C. And as the mayor mentioned, this is such a unique time with several of our senators and Congress folks that are on key committees, and we expect to be having additional funding coming to the state. Be nice to be able to get part of that to our citizens here. So I know we'll be having more conversations, may have you come back, But thank you for being here tonight and educating us. Thank you for the work that you do on behalf of smaller cities.
Well, thank you, sir. And happy to answer any of the questions that come up, and just really appreciate the invitation to be here tonight. One follow-up comment on our delegation. Our delegation has been proven partners on a bipartisan and a bicameral basis to our local communities. I have clients in Eastern Washington that work with Republicans. I have clients in Western Washington that work with Democrats. And this approach of bringing a community need to the delegation and asking them to help you solve it, it is a really time-consuming and hard thing to do, but it's actually pretty easy at its core. And it's the way that you approach it, and it's putting your community in front of it that really makes it successful. It's a privilege to be able to work with elected officials at a local level. And it's a privilege to work with our delegation who cares so much. And the fact that our delegation right now, we have both senators chairing committees in the Senate. We've got 4 members of our 10, we have 12 members of our our congressional delegation. 4 of them are on the Appropriations Committee. This is crazy. We're in really good shape. So it's a good place to be.
Great. Well, Jake, thank you. You have a good night tonight.
Thank you very much, sir.
Take care.
Much.
Well, our next topic is our water system plan update. Steve, I always feel bad for you and Sean when I don't have a ton of time for you. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and we'll see how far we can get on it. Thank you.
Sounds good. So yeah, good evening, everyone. Steve Woniszewski, Pub Works. Mr. Tozer is with us. He'll lead us through this, but trying to put a placeholder on the agenda is just to go over some things as we move forward. A couple items we want to highlight, a couple items, we'll let you know that are coming sooner than later. Sean did post something to the folder today, so there's just some things moving. I think with that, I'm going to guess we're probably going to go into council time, but I'll let Sean get started and see where we go.
Thank you, Steve, and good evening, City Council members, Mayor. Pleasure to see you. Sean Tozer, City of Duval Public Works Project Manager. I'm going to share my screen, and as Steve alluded, if our conversation goes over into City Council, if that's what we need to do, we can do that. But we don't want to short you for time. I will also move swiftly through many of these slides, so I will try not to just purposely extend time. Can everybody see this this screen just fine, the PowerPoint?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. All right, so here we go. So this is, a lot of this stuff will be pretty familiar to you. So we're going to kind of back up. But last thing first. So the goal out of this is to start to get consensus on the plan and where people are, how people are feeling, where people are at, where questions might still lie. And ultimately, we want to move forward toward adoption eventually. Not this meeting, obviously not next meeting, but sometime here in the near future. So the things we need to do to get there is make sure that we've addressed most of the questions to date. Certainly we may or may not have adequately addressed everything, but that's our goal, is to ultimately provide you the information you need. And then again, identify topics that are the most important yet to be addressed. And then at the end of this meeting, we want to kind of see where the comfort level of council is. And it might be that we move on to another, but again, just start to get some ideas about, how far along you guys have moved and what your comfort level is. So that is the goal. On this particular presentation, we talked a bit at the last meeting. I did provide that staff report, which hopefully had some additional background on some of the questions that we identified previously. The main topics we'll be looking at here is land use and population, chapter 3, chapter 9, water system improvements, which touches a little bit on the financial analysis, chapter 10, and then also the cost estimating methodology. It's not as daunting as it sounds. These are all background slides. I'm not going to highlight them too much. They're here if we have discussion points that we want to run back over. But again, I think you guys all at this point really understand what we're doing. You understand what our system looks like generally. Its operational status, its capabilities, its size, a lot of the details we've already run over. Again, I'm happy to entertain any questions on anything specific, but I'm not going to waste your time too bad. As far as what we want to talk about today here, chapter 3. So land use and population. This seemed to be an area of interest that I at least understood from City Council. I hopefully am not wrong in identifying that, but Chapter 3 really looks to align our plan to other plans. So you're looking at our citywide comprehensive plan, SPU's water system plans, Growth Management Act, East King County's coordinated water system plan. So Chapter 3 is really trying to make sure that we're not making a plan in a silo by ourselves that doesn't work with other agencies that we need to be doing business with and interacting with and who affect our lines of business. One thing, again, we tried to do a bit of work to make sure, Larissa and Laura planning looked at it, a little bit of everybody kind of touched this and really tried to align those population projections and housing forecasts into this plan as much as possible. Is there some things that probably don't match up 100%, certainly, but it was our best effort at the time at really trying to align forecasts to reality of where we were. What we see again, and all these chapters feed into one another. So what we saw is sort of the immediate growth or planned, known growth right in that 710 unit number. And so that was something that seems reasonably stable, something that we believe. And so this land use and population, along with what might happen outside of city limits, which is less, affects policies and design criteria. It affects water demands. It affects everything else in the system. So what is our capacity to do business and to operate as a water system? So all this stuff is very important in building the plan's strength. This was a chart that's in Chapter 3 that was provided before, but it just kind of gives a look at the population projections and sort of the growth trend that you see. I believe in the plan it cited that we're estimating a 1.25% overall growth rate year over year. And I think that was from the comprehensive system, not the comprehensive, the citywide comprehensive plan. As far as potential water growth, this was something that came up, and I even put notes in the bottom, which I believe you guys can see. We had talked a while ago, and I think we'd already provided this clarification about the future, service areas. So what might happen in UGAs and growth, and how would that affect our financial forecasts? And something we did confirm is that those numbers really weren't weighted heavily into our financial forecast. So if the city grows next to nothing in the urban growth areas or other space available, that's not going to have a major effect on the utility financial health. And I know I'm moving a little bit fast. I hope you guys don't mind. So again, that land use portion, or the land use and population, really feeds into future water use and identifying what do you need to put water in people's faucets and to keep everything working. Again, we looked at historical data, and then I wanted to share this one again, which is talked about the system capacity analysis. Something we reviewed with you before is that we have the capacity to grow quite a bit. Our pipe size, our really only limiting factor is our storage capacity. And even at that, we have more room for growth than we will likely ever see in any of our lifetimes, more than likely. So again, this sort of confirms that and shows you the equivalent residential units that the system's capable of handling. And again, just that we're very unlikely to ever reach those types of unit count. So Chapter 9. So again, these all feed into each other and complement each other very well. So water system improvements tells us how we maintain our system and what we need to do to improve to make sure that we're delivering that water that we're planning for those population, and again, for current and existing customers. It's really a look at, basic elements. So the types of projects in this plan and that you'll see in the CIP, I'm not sure how many people have read through the chapters already, are water main replacements, designated as R, looping as L, developer improvements, which are generally something that we know is an important system benefit, but really only would serve a function if development occurs. So something that we're unlikely to do on our own. Facilities and then citywide programs that have citywide benefit, but aren't necessarily infrastructure based. So they might be water use conservation, it might be backflow prevention, things like that. So along with the water system improvements, the consultant looks at scoring criteria and weighting projects based on age of pipe, pipe type, how many people it serves, things like that. So that's how you start to distill down a project list into what are the most important projects for the system by giving it different weighting and ranking factors. So that's really important, ranking and scoring, but it is not the most important thing. A lot of what we've often seen in our past and based on my understanding is we often see projects of opportunity that come up. So though a project may be ranked something, it might be that it gets built out of order. And often that is because you have an opportunity that may not otherwise present itself. So you have an opportunity for, to save costs, to have cost savings, maybe with an ownership change or a developer opportunity or another utility or city project that comes up that really drives a schedule. So we have to be nimble enough to understand that our rankings are important, but again, we also have to make sure that we're looking at the conditions on the ground and adjusting accordingly. I know this is super small. I don't expect you to read it, but this is just an overall look at the CIP. So again, you would have this in your PDFs. We're not going to go over them all. We can talk about anything if there's something that you have a burning question on for sure. But the biggest projects that we have as far as priority are the TOLT 2, which is underway as far as design and hopefully going to construction here this summer. And then we have some other minor water main replacement in Valley Street, some little AC catch up that we're just catching the last little bits. This is the map of the improvements. So if you want to know where things are, where they go, this is that map. There's some interesting things in here. And there's some of these ways these projects complement one another that is a little bit interesting. If we have time to talk about it, we can. But something else that's very important is how do we arrive at these project costs? So that is very tricky, especially when you're forecasting way, way out. So what we wanted to do is make sure we really clearly state that and help you understand how these project costs are derived. So we went back and looked at it, and there's a Appendix T, which was sent to you guys today, that really details that explicitly. So they use a process with this group that I never knew existed, the Association of the Advancement of Cost Engineering. It's been around for a very long time. So this is their bailiwick. But what they really say is the type of cost estimating that this uses, and it's generally appropriate for these types of plans, can be anywhere from -30% to +50% as far as cost estimations and actuals. So these are very high level planning purpose cost estimates that are included in this plan, because again, this might be something that happens in 10 years or 20 years or further out yet. So it doesn't generally warrant the kind of cost estimation you do at bid time. And again, along with that, that +50 to -30%. And then also, sorry. This also talks about how you develop those costs. So you look at the different components and contractor profit. So it really details very nicely all the different elements that go into it and how those things work together and estimate and come into the estimate into a total project cost, which is ultimately what we derive. And this is something we generally use when we go into a construction type project, or we're really looking at going into a active design and construction period. We start to look at whole project costs. So for the purposes of our plan, the consultants have derived these per linear foot project costs based on typical construction, and with all that methodology described in the cost estimating Appendix T. So you look at something for us like an 8-inch or a 12-inch pipe at $414 to $465 a linear foot. And that would include, open cut to backfill. Council, Mayor Pro Tem Remington, were you going to say something? I know, I'm like right on the edge, huh?
Oh, no, Sean. It looks like we've got several slides to go. And I apologize. I do like to give council members a few minutes, and we're 5 minutes away from our council meeting. Are we able to, do you have enough to do where worthwhile moving it to council? I hate to have you take more of your time this evening, but I really want to give council members time to take a few minute break.
And Mayor Pro Tem, we can take a little bit longer recess if we need to before we start the official council meeting.
Are you okay? So Sean, how many more slides?
I think it's not really 35. Most of those are background slides. I have 2 slides.
Okay, well, let's do 2 slides.
And they'll be really fast.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Again, you see how we've arrived at or how we go about the process of finding cost. And again, that's when we look at these costs, and remember when we get to construction, often they're different. And this is a reason why. So again, I'm back at the end. So this is what we're trying to do. This slide here, we want to make sure we're gaining consensus. We really want to give you guys the opportunity to have discussions and ask questions, make sure we're addressing any concerns or any gaps of information appropriately with you guys, so you're feeling comfortable about the decisions you're making. So that is all I have other than reference slides. I know it says 35, but those are just reference.
Well, thank you, Sean. Council members, questions for Sean? Feedback? Councilmember Langle.
Yeah, I just want to be really candid. We found out about this and the water treatment plan results within the last approximately 60 days. And it's an awful lot to digest. And I've said some of this before, but I feel like I have to reiterate that this type of long-term financial planning, it's great that we're doing it on a project basis, but I do think I'm not really sure what consensus means and what adopt means to Public Works Department. But I am very concerned about long-term financial obligations that we set in motion. And, it's very uncomfortable for me to say I support those types of components when I don't have that information. And so that's why I want to be candid. And I'm really hoping that we'll have an education opportunity on financial planning very, very quickly, so we at least know what we don't know. Because I think that's the type of independent financial review of the city that we absolutely have to take on some of these bigger discussions and financial or likely financial or possible financial decisions around rates. Actually, the water is less of concern to me other than rates, but we have a whole lot of things on our list. I have 12 things on my list. I keep a list that I'll just end there. I wanted to be candid about this, and I'm hoping there'll be more time to really dig through the financial side of this, as well as the water treatment proposal.
Other council members? Councilmember Naplin.
I have several questions though. So it's already 7. Are you expecting us to go over and then start the meeting late, or should we just carry this over? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, if there are several questions that's going to take more than 5 minutes, then I would say that might be best to put them in email to Sean and Steve so that we can get them answered for all of council.
I'd rather just share them out loud.
Yeah, I'm just like thinking about time. So timing. But it's ultimately, if council wants to continue on this way for 15 more minutes, we can, so that Mr. Tozer can get on with his evening, or we can.
I can get them done in 5 minutes for sure.
Yeah,
Great, let's go for it.
Jody, just a moment. City Clerk.
I was just going to say, somebody probably should hop over to the regular meeting at 7 o'clock so that we can let the community know that we are running a little bit behind on the cow. And I'm not going to be able to do that because I think it's going to have to be Laura that does that, if she's okay with that.
Laura or Dana, can one of you hop over?
I can do it if you make me. Can you make me?
I don't know. I can try.
Well, let's take a look at doing that. Go ahead, Jennifer, if you want to ask your questions, and we'll see how far we can get.
So the first question is something that I feel like hasn't been addressed, and this will be, I think, my 3rd time asking about it in addition to private conversations quite some time ago, and it has to do with the staffing projections. And what my concern is that as part of this, and honestly, I haven't seen a final financial chapter which would include all of this. I'm not really sure why that hasn't been provided, since it says in the presentation that it was completed last month. I know the Public Works Committee got a lot of information, but I don't know that the rest of council has. And I do have some questions about it. I think that's probably the most important chapter, that talks about, that is how you calculate the fees, the rates. It's super important. And the staffing, I still just don't understand the calculation for the staffing requirement for reading the meters. I did find a couple other cities and they use the 0.1. They do every other month reading, it looked like, because they only have 6 reads a year. And there were notes in their plans that said, hey, we're still manually reading meters. We're hoping for some efficiencies. I mean, we've already implemented a lot of efficiency, so it really doesn't make any sense to me. And if that number is actually representing not meter reads, but some other kind of, rechecking or something, it just doesn't seem justified looking at other cities' calculations of, their bi-monthly uses the 0.1. So we're using that 0.1 every 12 times a year. And my concern is, and I know it sounded like we needed new staffing, you're aware of that, but this is being projected forward in proportion to population growth, because as population grows, you add meters. So the very most expensive high intensity staff cost, which drives our rates. I mean, that's the fact, is staffing is what drives rate increases. And, to project that in direct proportion to population growth, I mean, we look at other cities and say, wow, why are their water rates lower? It's economy of scale. And to think that we can't initiate efficiency projects and we can't gain any efficiency, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I've asked this question multiple times and I just don't see it justified. And, it's a struggle for me. And I haven't had that really addressed. The other thing is I don't know if I've seen the GFC calculation. Maybe I have missed it. And then again, there's, where did we get the 690 units from for that second 10-year decade? I don't really see any documentation where that came from. I don't know that it lines up with our comp plan. So I'm a little bit puzzled by that, where that 690 came from. I think Sean shook his head. So I think the 690 I'm talking about. And at one point it says 690 people, but I'm wondering if you meant 690 units. Okay. And then
yeah, that was, yeah, the go ahead.
Okay. And then on the one section when it talked about estimating project costs, it said that there was a legal admin type charge that was included. And then also so I think that's great. But what's interesting is at our city, we don't seem to charge to project